The crackle of static filled Kalavas's comm as the blackened sky of Earth loomed outside the small transport's window. Below, the sprawling ruins of a once thriving metropolis sprawled across the horizon. This city had been the last bastion of humanity's hope, but now it was nothing more than a ghost, swallowed whole by the Xor. The rebels, Kayla's rebels, had been forced to fight for every inch of this planet. They had become a splintered echo of a force that had once controlled galaxies. But now, they were nothing more than a few thousand survivors scattered across the stars. Earth's soil had been stained with the blood of their best, their brightest, their most willing. And yet, here they were. Kayla tapped the controls, flicking switches, adjusting the course as the ship shuddered under the weight of its ancient technology. With a grunt, she leaned back in her seat, her face a mask of determination and exhaustion. A map of the city pulsed on the screen in front of her, marking their destination. The intel they had received was unreliable, but it was all they had left. An old weapon, buried deep beneath the city, a weapon capable of wiping out a Xor battalion in minutes. If it was real. "You sure about this, Captain?" The voice of Sergeant Vega came over the comm, laced with uncertainty. Kayla gritted her teeth. "I don't have a choice. We find it or we die here." The ship rattled again as it descended through the turbulent atmosphere, and she focused. As the distant ruins grew closer, her mind ran through 100 worst-case scenarios. The Xor had completely overrun this sector, its soldiers like cockroaches, insidious and relentless. They had no mercy. No remorse. And humanity? Humanity was struggling to hold on to scraps. Vega's voice broke her focus, again. "We're almost there. Xor patrols spotted near the outskirts." "Noted. Everyone, stay sharp. If we get hit, we don't have time for a fight. We're in and out." "Understood?" Kayla's voice was steel. Her people had died because of hesitation before. She wouldn't let that happen again. A chorus of affirmatives came from the others as the transport jerked in midair. Then, the shaking stopped. Silence. Then the doors opened, and Kayla stepped onto the cracked concrete of the war-torn city. The air smelled of decay, the remnants of fires long extinguished. She could feel the weight of it all, the sweat on her back, the sickening reality of their situation. But there was no time for emotion. Not now. Her boots hit the ground with a thud, crunching on the shattered streets. Ahead, skeletal remains of buildings loomed like mourners at a grave. The wind carried the scent of burnt flesh, the stench of desperation. Her team followed her, eyes scanning, weapons drawn, moving in tight formation. They had to move fast. Time wasn't on their side. Approaching the location, she said through the comm, her voice low. "Stay close." They moved through the ruins, silent as ghosts, each step heavy with the burden of the past. Kayla kept her focus ahead, her fingers tight on the rifle. The squad of 6 moved as one: Vega, a sharpshooter, Lieutenant Darren, the tactician, Corporal Min, the demolitions expert, Sergeant Harris, the communications officer, and Private Riker, the rookie who'd joined the rebellion just days before. They were the last of what had once been humanity's finest. The Xor had wiped out entire armies, but still, they fought. Kayla stopped. "Everyone, hold." She held up a hand. A sharp sound echoed down the street, a footstep, maybe. She signaled. Instantly, the squad scattered, taking cover behind debris. Kayla crouched low, eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. There. A shadow moving across the rooftop of a crumbling building. "Target spotted," Vega's voice whispered in her ear. "Let them pass." "We're not here for a firefight," Kayla muttered. "We're here to survive." As the seconds stretched on, the tension thickened. The Xor patrol moved on without noticing them, a stroke of luck. Kayla exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They couldn't afford to engage the enemy unless absolutely necessary. If the Xor detected them here, they would call reinforcements, and it wouldn't matter how many old weapons they had, they'd be slaughtered. They moved on, crossing the remains of what used to be a main street, its asphalt cracked and torn, the skeletal remains of vehicles scattered like fallen soldiers. The wreckage was a cruel reminder of what Earth had once been, a place of beauty, a place of life. Kayla stopped again. In the distance, a structure loomed, partly buried, but still intact. It was the kind of place the Xor would never bother to search. It had been forgotten by everyone, even by those who lived here long ago. According to the maps, it was the last known location of the weapon. Stay quiet. We move fast from here, Kayla ordered. They advanced cautiously, each step deliberate. Then, something hit the ground with a sickening thud behind them, a heavy footstep. One that wasn't human. Kayla's pulse quickened. Shit. They're on us. Can't be. Darren hissed, his voice barely audible. We'd hear the hovercrafts. Before he could finish, a shrill, mechanical hiss echoed from behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of Xor soldiers. Kayla cursed under her breath. They were out of time. Everyone, take cover, she barked. The squad dove for whatever they could, ruined walls, burned out vehicles, any scrap of shelter. Kayla slammed her back against the corner of a crumbled building, breathing fast. Her eyes darted to the others, her hand twitching near the communicator. She didn't need to say anything, they knew the drill. Then, a voice, guttural and mocking, sliced through the air. Fleeing, human. How predictable. It was Zal, the Xor leader. The voice came from a nearby loudspeaker, the mechanical rasp of an AI-controlled system manipulating his words. He was watching them. Waiting. Kayla clenched her fists, eyes burning with the same fire that had fueled humanity's fight for so long. We'll see who runs first, Zal, she whispered. Not today. A series of explosions rocked the ground as men set off a charge to create a diversion. The blast was deafening, and Kayla didn't hesitate. She sprinted, her squad following suit, through the chaos, aiming for the structure. As they reached the building, Kayla glanced back, her breath coming in short gasps. The Xor had arrived, but they were too late. We're in, she shouted. They piled into the structure, hearts racing, eyes darting to the dark corridors ahead. Kayla looked up at the crumbling ceiling. The weapon was in here. She could feel it. They had no idea what kind of danger awaited them, but they had no choice. You ready, Captain? Vega asked, breathing heavily. Kayla looked back, meeting her eyes with a fire that spoke of everything humanity had endured. We're all ready. Now let's bring this fight to them. And just like that, they moved forward into the depths, but the question hung in the air, what would they find in the shadows of this forsaken place? The air inside the ancient structure was stale, thick with the dust of centuries. Kayla Voss stood at the threshold of what seemed like a tomb, a relic from a past humanity had long abandoned. The walls, once gleaming with advanced technology, now crumbled under the weight of neglect. Lights flickered weakly overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. It felt wrong, like a place forgotten by time, yet somehow preserved for this very moment. Stay alert, Kayla muttered, her voice a low rasp. Her eyes scanned the space ahead, every instinct honed to the raw, animal urgency that defined survival. The squad moved quietly behind her. Min, the demolitions expert, kept her hand near her sidearm, eyes darting in every direction. Vega, always the vigilant one, scanned the walls with his rifle raised. Darren was at her side, the tactician, scanning the layout of the room with the sharp eyes of someone who could read a battlefield like a map. We've got movement, Darren said, his voice soft, but urgent. About 30 meters ahead, through that door. Kayla's pulse quickened. She held up her hand. Quiet. We move as one. The building's low hum seemed to reverberate in her chest as they approached the doorway. A thick metallic door, aged and scratched, stood between them and whatever lay beyond. The walls here were lined with what seemed like old storage containers, long-forgotten equipment, and strange markings Kayla couldn't quite make sense of. She didn't have the time to decipher it. Time was running out. Ready, she whispered. Min's voice came through her earpiece. Always. With a sharp motion, Kayla signaled to move. Darren was first, moving with the precision of someone who had lived and died by tactical planning. He cleared the corner of the door, quickly and quietly, his rifle pointed into the dark. The others followed, and Kayla moved last, her boots hitting the floor with a muted thud. The room was much larger than she'd anticipated. It was cavernous, stretching out into shadowy depths. And in the center, bathed in flickering light, was the object of their search, a massive, dormant machine. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. The weapon, whatever it was, stood at the heart of the chamber. It resembled a hybrid between an old Earth satellite and something more alien. Its surface gleamed faintly, covered in thick layers of dust, but the presence of the technology was undeniable. The sheer size of the thing sent a thrill through her. This was their chance. The weapon they'd come for. But there was no time to celebrate. Not yet. Get to work, she ordered. Min and Darren immediately moved forward, both hands working in unison to activate the machine. Riker, still green but eager, watched over their shoulders, nervously checking his weapon. Kayla kept her eyes on the door, every muscle in her body tensed. "What's the holdup?" she asked, her voice sharp. Darren glanced over his shoulder, sweat dripping down his face despite the coolness of the room. "It's old, damn old. Whatever energy source it uses, it's been depleted. I can't get it to respond." "Damn it," Kayla muttered. They didn't have time for this. They needed to move, and they needed to move fast. The Xor would be hunting them soon. Vega stepped forward, his voice grim. "We might have to blow it. Can't leave it in enemy hands." "No," Kayla said, her eyes narrowing. "We'll get it working. We don't destroy it unless there's no other choice." Min looked up from the control panel, her face twisted in frustration. "This isn't like anything I've seen. It's a power converter, a type of energy storage I've never..." Her words were cut short as a sharp crack echoed from the distance. The sound of gunfire. Kayla's heart leapt into her throat. "Get down," she shouted, throwing herself to the floor, just as the door behind them exploded inward with a deafening boom. Blinding light flooded the room, and the unmistakable hiss of Xor weapons filled the air. "Ambush!" Vega barked, raising his rifle. He fired, the sound of his shots swallowed by the chaos. Kayla rolled behind a piece of debris, her mind spinning. She'd known this was coming. Zal wouldn't let them take this weapon without a fight. But now they were trapped. Outgunned and outnumbered. "Man! Darren!" Kayla shouted over the noise. "Keep working. We need that weapon online now." Min cursed, her hands still moving furiously over the panel. "It's not responding. I need more time." "No time." Kayla shouted, peering around the corner. The Xor were pouring in, dozens of them. The squad couldn't hold them off forever. The room was filling up with smoke, and the echoes of gunfire were deafening. "Do it now, Min. We're done if you don't." Min nodded, her face pale but resolute. Her fingers flew across the control panel, pressing buttons, pulling levers. The machine let out a deep rumble, followed by an unnatural silence. Kayla's heart thudded in her chest as she stared at the weapon. It was powering up, just barely. "I got it!" Min shouted. "But it's unstable. We have to get out of here, now. Move out!" Kayla screamed. The squad surged forward, weapons blazing. Vega, Darren, and Harris covered their retreat, the roar of their rifles deafening in the tight quarters. The Xor soldiers were relentless, charging forward with their alien weapons in hand, their eyes glowing with the same hatred they'd always shown humanity. Kayla led the charge toward the exit, but the hallway was narrow, only enough room for the squad to move in single file. Behind her, the echoing crash of metal doors being torn open signaled more reinforcements. "Fall back!" Kayla shouted, as she fired a burst into the advancing aliens. "Min, you're next." But the walls seemed to close in. Every direction was blocked. They'd barely made it out of the room when a Xor grenade exploded just feet away. The blast threw Kayla against the wall, the world spinning around her. "Captain!" Vega's voice cut through the haze, his hand gripping her arm, pulling her to her feet. Blood was dripping from her ear, but her vision cleared. "Go!" she roared. The squad fought their way down the hallway, the Xor forces closing in. The weapon had been activated, but now the fight for their lives had truly begun. And they were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting to reclaim Earth. But the real question remained, had they activated the weapon in time? And if not, would it be enough to change the tide of war? Kayla Voss's breath came in ragged bursts as she sprinted down the corridor, her boots pounding against the jagged floor. The Xor soldiers were relentless, their footsteps echoing through the hallways behind her. She could hear their guttural growls, the eerie screeches of their weapons locking into place. Every step she took felt like a countdown. Time wasn't on their side. "Min, Darren." "How much longer?" she barked, eyes scanning the narrow passage for any sign of an exit. "I've almost got it." Min's voice crackled over the comm, a note of strain in her voice. "This thing is a mess of old tech and alien nonsense. But I'm close. I swear it'll work." Kayla didn't have the luxury of swearing. The Xor were everywhere, their numbers growing with each passing second. Darren's voice came through just behind her, sharp and precise as ever. "Captain, I've got eyes on the flank, 2 squads converging on our position. We'll be pincered in minutes. We need to move, now. Not until Min gets this weapon online." Kayla shot back, her eyes darting toward the shadows ahead. The heavy thud of the Xor soldiers' boots sounded closer now, closer than she wanted them to be. "We don't have that long," Vega said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to think of a plan B. They'll overwhelm us. We can't hold the line forever." Kayla clenched her jaw. She wasn't the type to surrender, especially not with humanity's last hope in her hands. She shot a look toward Min, who was hunched over a makeshift control panel in the center of the hallway. Sweat dripped from the demolitions expert's brow, her fingers flying across the alien interface as she fought against time. "Min!" Kayla barked again. "This better work. We're running out of options." Min didn't answer right away, her face tight with concentration. But then, her fingers hit a final button, and the panel flickered to life, a low hum vibrating through the floor beneath them. "I've got it!" Min shouted, her voice cracking with relief. "Weapons primed. But I don't know how long it'll stay stable. We need to get to the core, now." Before Kayla could respond, the sound of heavy footfalls filled the air, louder and faster. The Xor were closing in from both sides now. There was no way they could outrun them. No way they could outfight them. This was it, the moment of truth. "Vega," Kayla growled. "Give me a way out." Without a word, Vega peeled off from the group, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for anything that could give them an advantage. He motioned to Kayla, signaling that he had a plan. "Follow me," he ordered, and without hesitation, Kayla and the others sprinted after him. Their feet slapped against the floor, and every corner they turned seemed to lead them into an even darker labyrinth. The sound of Xor soldiers yelling in their native tongue echoed in the hallways, a warning that they were closing in. Kayla's heart beat faster. The end was coming, whether they were ready or not. They reached the edge of the building's central core, a massive, open chamber filled with alien technology. At its center, a power conduit stretched from floor to ceiling, pulsating with energy. The weapon was designed to feed from it, its power source. But the room was crawling with Xor soldiers, their red eyes glowing in the dim light. At least 24 of them, all heavily armed. They stood between the team and the weapons core. Kayla's breath hitched. There was no way to fight through that. No way to charge in and survive. "Darren, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice strained. Darren didn't miss a beat. "We'll need to create a diversion. Min, you're going to set the explosives. I'll cover you." "Explosives?" Kayla's voice was low, disbelief creeping into her words. Darren's gaze locked with hers, cold and focused. It's the only way. The diversion will buy us time to activate the weapon. Kayla didn't flinch. She knew Darren well enough to trust him. She nodded. Do it. Min's hands were already moving, her fingers dancing over her pack, pulling out the necessary charges. Her face was pale, but determination burned in her eyes. She wasn't going to fail. Kayla turned to Vega. Get ready. We move on my mark. Cover Min until she's clear. Vega nodded silently, positioning himself behind a nearby column. His weapon was raised, aiming at the nearest Xor soldier. The tension in the air was palpable. Min worked quickly, her hands flying as she set the charges. It only took a few moments, but it felt like an eternity. Every footstep that sounded behind them was a reminder of how little time they had. Done, Min muttered, glancing up at Kayla. Now get the hell out of here. Kayla didn't hesitate. Vega, fire on my mark. On it, Vega's voice was tight, but calm. He could feel the weight of the moment, too. Kayla took a deep breath, readying herself. Now. Vega fired. The shots rang out, echoing through the room as Xor soldiers scrambled to react. The first few were hit instantly, their bodies collapsing under the barrage. But the rest didn't hesitate. They fought back with brutal efficiency. Min, move! Kayla shouted, charging forward. Min sprinted toward the power conduit, her hands pulling triggers and hitting switches. The entire room shook, a deafening explosion ripping through the air. The force of the blast sent debris flying, and Kayla was knocked back, her vision blurring for a moment. Through the haze of smoke and dust, Kayla's eyes locked onto the weapon. It hummed with power, its core glowing brighter with each passing second. The Xor were disoriented, their ranks shattered by the explosion, but they weren't done. They were already regrouping, and Kayla knew they didn't have much time. We're not out of this yet. Darren yelled. Get to the core and activate the damn weapon. Kayla didn't need to be told twice. She charged toward the weapon, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. She leaped over a pile of wreckage, landing near the control panel. Darren was beside her in an instant, his hands already working at the interface. The seconds dragged by, each one feeling like a century. Kayla watched the Xor regrouping, their weapons trained on her squad. This was it. They had no backup, no way out. They were going to have to fight their way through to the very end. Darren's voice broke through the tension. It's done. We've got power to the weapon. Kayla grinned, but it was a feral, desperate grin. Then let's give them hell. The weapon roared to life, sending a shockwave through the room. The Xor soldiers were blasted back, their bodies flung across the chamber. The air buzzed with the raw power of humanity's last stand. It was a victory, but one paid for in blood. Kayla turned to her squad, her breath ragged but victorious. We've won. But the war's just begun. The silence after the blast was deafening. Kayla Voss stood, her eyes scanning the destruction around her. The room was filled with the acrid smell of burning metal and scorched earth. The weapon had discharged with an immense force, sending shockwaves through the Xor ranks. The last of the alien soldiers, now little more than charred corpses, lay scattered across the chamber like discarded toys. Yet, despite the carnage, Kayla knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Is everyone all right? Kayla's voice broke the quiet, sharp and commanding. Her hand was still gripping the rifle, knuckles white, but her eyes never wavered from the space ahead. Vega, crouched behind a pillar, lowered his weapon, scanning the remains. We've made a dent, but not enough to break them. They'll regroup, and they'll come for us. Hard. Darren moved past them, eyes flicking over the control panel with urgency. We've activated the weapon, but the system is unstable. We don't have long before it's either drained or overrun. We'll have to make it last, Kayla muttered, stepping forward. Min, is the power conduit holding? Min looked up from where she was crouched, her fingers still near the detonator. Sweat slicked her face, but her voice was steady. Barely. It's unstable, but it's running. We might get one more blast out of it, if we're lucky. Kayla's jaw tightened. We need to be more than lucky. We need to win. Her team nodded in grim agreement, the weight of the situation pressing down on them all. They had taken a victory today, but it was a temporary one. Xarn's forces were relentless. And this weapon, powerful as it was not going to be their savior, it was their only hope. Captain, Vega said, his voice low, I think it's time we talked about our exit strategy. We can't keep holding this position. The Xor will come at us from every angle. If we don't get to the rendezvous point soon, we're all dead. Kayla turned to face him, her expression unreadable. We don't run. We fight. We can't keep fighting, Kayla, Darren interjected, his voice a mix of exhaustion and reality. We're not soldiers anymore. We're survivors. We need a plan that'll get us out of here alive, not one that'll see us fighting to the bitter end. Kayla's gaze hardened, a flicker of something dark passing through her eyes. And what? Let them win? Let them wipe us out completely? No one's saying that, Vega replied, stepping closer. But we've got to be smart. We've got one shot at this, and it's a long shot. We need to regroup and plan our next move. Not get caught up in a losing battle. Kayla's fists clenched. I didn't come this far to die in some forgotten corner of a ruined earth. I came to fight. To win. Her voice was fierce, unwavering. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at the back of her mind. They were cornered. Outnumbered. Outgunned. The Xor would find them eventually, no matter how well they fought. A soft ping from the control panel interrupted her thoughts. Darren was still at it, his eyes focused, fingers working with quick precision. We've got incoming, Darren said, his voice taut. More Xor, and they're close. Min, Kayla snapped. Can you set up another blast? Min hesitated, then shook her head. The charge is too risky. If I try to overload it now, it might take out the whole building, and we'll go down with it. Kayla bit back a curse. Then what do we do? Vega raised his rifle, checking the power pack. We fight. We hold them off long enough for Min to get the weapon stabilized. It's the only shot we've got. Kayla didn't like it, but she knew it was their only choice. They didn't have time for elaborate plans. No more fancy tactics. It was down to raw instinct. To survival. Vega, she said, locking eyes with him, cover Min while she works. Darren, you and I will hold the line. The team moved into position without hesitation, the adrenaline coursing through their veins. The sounds of the approaching Xor forces were growing louder, footsteps, shouts, the unmistakable whine of alien weaponry charging. There was no turning back now. Kayla crouched behind a pile of debris, her rifle trained on the entrance to the chamber. She could hear them, the alien warlord soldiers, closing in, their voices a low hum of language too foreign to understand. The Xor were intelligent. Strategic. And they would be coming for them with everything they had. Min was working quickly, her fingers flying over the control panel, her face set in a mask of concentration. Kayla kept her focus on the door, her breath steady, her heartbeat a drum in her ears. She could feel the weight of her team's trust on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to fail them now. You ready? Kayla's voice cut through the tension, her eyes still locked on the door. Min didn't look up, but her voice was steady. Almost. Just need a few more seconds. Seconds. That was all they had left. A shadow passed through the door, followed by the unmistakable sound of Xor footsteps. Then another. And another. The soldiers were closing in. Kayla's grip on her rifle tightened, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. She could hear the Xor, smell their metallic stench, and feel their presence creeping closer. Her mind raced, calculating, preparing for what was about to come. Now, Min! Kayla shouted. In that moment, the weapon roared to life. A blinding light surged from the control panel, flooding the room with an intense pulse of energy. The Xor soldiers at the door were thrown back, their bodies slamming into the walls with sickening force. The ground shook as the weapon unleashed its fury, sending shockwaves through the building. Kayla barely had time to react as the Xor regrouped, charging back into the fray. But this time, they were different. The weapon had done its job. The Xor were stunned, disoriented. They were no longer the unstoppable force they had been. "Move, now!" Kayla shouted. She didn't wait for them to respond. She charged forward, her team right behind her. The Xor were down, but not out. They were regrouping, faster than Kayla had anticipated. The squad fought their way through the Xor ranks, each step a desperate battle for survival. Kayla could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her chest, the adrenaline surging through her. They were almost there. The exit was within reach. But the Xor weren't done. They weren't finished. "Get to the rendezvous!" Kayla screamed as she fired again, cutting down another alien soldier in her path. "Go! Now!" The team broke into a sprint, charging toward the exit. The Xor were still coming, but Kayla knew one thing for sure: they weren't going to win this time. Not today. As they burst through the final doors, Kayla took one last look back at the crumbling structure behind them. They had taken the fight to the Xor. And they had won. For now. "Let's go," she muttered, a fire burning in her chest. "The war isn't over. But we're not done yet." And with that, the fight for Earth, and for humanity, continued.